Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. A few things going on at the moment and I will update you in a little while. In the meantime, however, I'm pleased to present you with another compilation video featuring 5 serial killers. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel. Please click the bell so you get notifications. Click like and comment down below. Thanks very much and catch up with you again soon. Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the life and crimes of serial killer Robert Maury. He is also known as the Tipster Killer, born in Del Norte County, California, on the 24th of February 1958. Very little is known about his early years, but what we do know is that he had at least one sibling, a brother, and in later years would claim that he had suffered both physical and mental abuse at the hands of his father. As an adult, he lived in Cottonwood in southern Shasta County. He supported himself by working as a landscaper at a golf course and also as a dried flower arranger. This income was supplemented by selling marijuana. On the 6th of November 1987, Robert was arrested at his home on suspicion of 3 murders. The events that led up to his arrest began just over 2 years earlier, in the spring of 1985, and stemmed from his desire to both profit and be recognised for his crimes. In the May of 1985, Robert rented a room in the home of 48-year-old Averill Deanna Whedon. Within a couple of weeks of his arrival, Averill's mother, Eula Chartier, started to have concerns for her daughter's well-being. Eula had phoned her daughter on several occasions and, each time, Robert would answer the telephone and state that Averill was either out or unavailable. However, when Averill failed to return any of her mother's calls, Eula became increasingly worried. She kept calling asking about her daughter's whereabouts until Robert eventually became tired of her questions, shouting, "How in the hell am I supposed to know where she is?" Averill's brother, Bill, decided to visit her house, and the family's concerns were raised still further when he met her new tenant, Robert, who gave conflicting stories as to Averill's whereabouts. Bill asked around, and a neighbour, Ray Morris, told Bill that the last time he had seen her was riding off with Robert on the back of Robert's motorcycle. Averill's family reported her missing on the 25th of May 1985. Robert was interviewed by the police on the 3rd of June. He told them that he had given Averill a lift on his motorbike to a telephone box, left her there, and then went to a different location to buy her some drugs. He then claimed to have returned to the telephone box to pick her up and said that they both returned to the house. Although the police were very suspicious of Robert, there was no evidence to contradict his story. On the 19th of June, an anonymous person called the Secret Witness Program of Shasta County. This is a private, non-profit organisation that is dedicated to improving public safety and also solving crimes by generating information to assist law enforcement. The program protects tipsters by allowing them to remain anonymous while still rewarding them for the information that they provide. The anonymous caller spoke to Shirley Landreth at the program and asked her how much the reward would be for information leading to the discovery of Averill's body. The anonymous person called again on the 8th of August. Shirley recognised his voice from the previous call, and once a reward amount of $500 was agreed, the caller told Shirley what he knew about the location of Averill's body. The caller also claimed that he knew the identity of Averill's murderer, and if he received his reward money in a timely manner, he would provide more information. He then went on to say that there were 6 unsolved murders in Shasta County, and that he could provide details to help solve 2 of them. Later that day, Averill's severely decomposed body was found buried in debris off of a trail behind a car body shop on Bocelli Lane in Reading. An autopsy revealed that she had died from strangulation and had also suffered multiple skull fractures around the time of her death. Shirley would receive 4 more calls from the same tipster during the August of 1985. On the 12th of August, he claimed that the person responsible for Averill's death lived with her. The caller would not agree to meet with the detectives, but would answer their questions anonymously using Shirley as an intermediary. On the 15th of August he called again and informed them that the murderer was named Bob or Robert and had rented a room from Averill. The caller said that she had been strangled with a clothesline from her back garden, dragged to where she was, eventually found, and then hit with a rock to make sure that she was dead. The caller also gave the location of the clothesline used to strangle her, and it was found next to a shed in her back garden. A further call was made on the 26th of August, and, in response to more questions, the caller described the clothes that Averill had been wearing at the time of her death. Robert was interviewed again by the police on the 4th of September and reiterated what he had previously told them. There was still no evidence against him. In November 1985, Robert spoke to the police again and, in return for consideration in an unrelated stolen property case, he gave a statement claiming that it was Averill's neighbour, Ray Morris, and an unknown accomplice who had killed her. Robert went on to say that the pair had threatened to kill him if he turned them into the police. Another interview followed on the 10th of December where slight inconsistencies began to emerge in Robert's story. It was noticed that the way he talked was similar to the way in which the anonymous informant said and phrased things. Robert was asked if he was the person who kept calling the tip line. He said that he wasn't. On the 11th of September 1986, Robert called the tip line and gave his name along with information about a burglary in return for a reward. Shirley recognised his voice from the numerous anonymous calls the year before. Another year passed, and on the 20th of June 1987, Robert met a woman by the name of Jacqueline H. and offered her a ride on his motorbike, which she accepted. Later, she spotted him near her house, and Jacqueline agreed to go out with him to Happy Valley to meet up with some fellow bikers. Not far into the journey, Jacqueline realised that they were not headed to Happy Valley. Instead, Robert took her into the woods, placed a rope around her neck, and ordered her to strip. He then sexually assaulted her before telling her to get dressed. Finally, he then drove her back home. Jacqueline believed she was going to die that night, but was terrified and went into shock. She did not report the assault at the time, but came forward later as details of Robert's other crimes emerged. A couple of days later, on the 22nd of June 1987, a lady by the name of Dawn Berryhill left her 6-month-old son with a friend in order to meet up with a man named Bob, now known to be Robert, who she was planning to rent an apartment from. Several people identified him as being with her that night. She was never seen alive again. Her disappearance was not of immediate concern to those who knew her, as she would often leave home and return a few days later. However, when she did not return, her disappearance was reported by her mother. 4 days after Dawn's disappearance, another woman, 30-year-old Belinda Jo Stark, also disappeared without a trace. She was due to appear in court in Nevada City on 29th of June 1987, but never showed up. As Belinda also had a habit of coming and going, she was never reported as missing to the police. On the 8th of August 1987, the anonymous caller made contact with the tip line again, this time asking how much reward he would get for information relating to the location of the body of someone by the name of Gretchen Olsen. Once again, Shirley believed the voice to be Robert's. Several more calls were made in which the caller said that Gretchen had been dead for about 6 weeks, and he provided details of where her body could be found. It was during one of these calls that Shirley recorded a sample of the caller's voice. She played it to Detective Mundy, who was investigating the case, who agreed that he believed the calls were made by Robert Maury. As per the arrangement, the reward of $500 was left for the caller at the pickup point in the office of a title company in Reading. In exchange, the caller would provide an envelope giving information as to the identity of the killer. The caller collected the money, but the envelope that should have contained the information was empty. It was later established that Robert's fingerprint was in this envelope. Based on the information that the caller had already provided, more human remains were found in a similar area to where Jacqueline H. had been assaulted. It was not possible to immediately identify these remains. The following month, in September 1987, Robert once again made multiple anonymous calls to the tip line. His voice was recognised, and as the tip line was now working closely with the police, some of these calls were recorded. After negotiating another reward, the tip led to Dawn's body being found under an old mattress in a remote area approximately 200 metres from where the police had discovered the unidentified body in August. An autopsy showed that Dawn had been strangled to death with a bootlace. Surveillance was set up at the title company office where the tip money was collected, and Robert was seen and photographed entering the offices. The title company director was also able to positively identify him. Robert had by this time received about $2,000 from the tip line, which he had used to pay off some of his debts and also to buy himself a motorbike. Robert was questioned once again on the 5th of October 1987. It was suggested to him that he had killed the 3 women whose bodies he had helped find. Robert admitted that he knew all kinds of girls who were missing, but denied killing anyone. Shortly afterwards, Robert made 2 more calls to the tip line. He was extremely angry that his anonymity had not been maintained, and he asked to meet with the program coordinator to complain about this breach of his privacy. Roy Del Carlo, a member of the Secret Witnesses Board of Directors, agreed to meet with Robert. Working with the police, Roy was wearing a wire. During the meeting, Robert complained that he had been photographed collecting secret witness reward money and that he wanted an apology from both them and the police. The police also wanted Roy to try to find out about the unidentified body. Yet again, Robert wanted a reward in return for further information. This ultimately helped with the identification of the remains, who were confirmed on the 16th of October 1987 as belonging to Belinda Jo Stark. Her cause of death could not be fully determined, but from the autopsy together with evidence of the crime scene, it was concluded that she had been sexually assaulted and suffered an unnatural death. On the 6th of November 1987, Robert was arrested on suspicion of all 3 murders. He was placed in jail in lieu of the required $750,000 bail. The following day, as details of Robert's crimes and his picture was made public, further witnesses came forward, including a bartender, Sandra Morton, who confirmed that Robert had been with Belinda at the time of her disappearance. Robert claimed that he had never seen Belinda before. Nevertheless, his prints were discovered on the inside of her purse. On the 9th of November, Robert was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, and the option of bail was revoked. He claimed he was innocent and that he had merely witnessed one of the murders. At trial, Robert's defence was that he was a keen walker and had accidentally stumbled across the bodies whilst out walking. He had then been a good Samaritan and reported these finds to the tip line. However, the prosecution presented an altogether more convincing version of events, detailing the telephone calls that he had made to the tip line and stating that he would regularly visit the bodies of his victims and would only report them to the police once they had substantially decomposed. There were numerous witnesses that placed him with the victims in the hours before their deaths. Robert's former girlfriend, Beth von Milanich, testified that in 1985, when his landlady, Averill, was murdered, he had become very excited about the fact that he was a suspect. A former co-worker, Norma Schwartz, also came forward and testified that Robert had threatened her during an argument, stating, "Listen, B, I have killed before and you'll be just one more, and I'm going to snuff you out." The jury found him guilty of all 3 murders, and Robert told them to sentence him to death if they truly believed that he was guilty. On the 27th of October 1989, this is exactly what they did. Robert appealed his conviction in 2003 on the basis that many legal errors were committed during his trial. This included the fact that the jury had been told about the calls to the tip line, and he argued that his Fourth Amendment rights had been violated by the secret witness program not keeping his identity private. The California Supreme Court disagreed. They stated that tipsters to the line do not have a right to expect their calls to remain private, adding that any reasonable caller would know that the information provided would be passed on to law enforcement, and that the secret witness program only guarantees anonymity to witnesses and not criminals or tipsters who the police suspect are providing information about their own criminal activities. As a result, the appeal was rejected. With the timeline of events and Robert's claims of knowing about other unsolved murders, the police believe that he may have killed many more people than the 3 of which he was convicted, with one commenting that people he became acquainted with had a tendency to disappear. However, Robert has never been definitively linked to any other crimes and remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison in California. That concludes today's case. I'd like to say thank you to Laura Bustos for suggesting that I cover this case. Thanks for your email, Laura. You'll notice in today's video that there weren't many photos available. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The lady behind the witness program of Shasta County, Shirley Landreth, passed away in 1994, aged 61. Her contributions in this case were crucial. Thank you, Shirley. Goodbye. Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be looking at how a primary school teacher from India managed to get away with murder for over 4 years and subsequently becoming known as one of the country's most prolific serial killers. Mohan Kumar was born on the 6th of April 1963. He was raised with his sister and 2 brothers in Mangalore, Karnataka, which is a state in southern India. His parents worked as labourers for wealthy farm owners and were paid a basic daily wage. Money was scarce, and as part of a governmental housing redevelopment scheme in the 1970s, the family moved to a single-storey house where the children spent their childhood. Despite limited educational opportunity, the 4 siblings were bright and worked hard at school. Mohan was known to be particularly keen on sports, particularly cricket and the contact team sport kabaddi. In the mid-1970s, Mohan's father abandoned his family, leaving Mohan's mother to raise the 4 children alone. After finishing his high school education, Mohan attended Uppinagadi First Grade College in Dakshina, Canada to obtain his degree. After graduation, he became a primary school teacher working on a contractual basis at various schools across the district. He would teach physical education and sports to the young children. His first marriage ended in divorce, and his family then arranged for him to marry a woman by the name of Manjula, with whom he had 2 sons. Whilst he was always pleasant to Manjula, Mohan was very distant within the marriage, and they would do very little together as either a couple or as a family. Unknown to Manjula, Mohan had married another woman during this time and had 2 more children. Manjula believed that during the lengthy periods which Mohan spent away from her, Mohan was working hard to support their family, and presumably his 3rd wife, who was unaware of Manjula, felt the same. The truth, however, was far more sinister. Mohan had lost his latest teaching job in 2003 and could not find a new position. Unable to support his 2 families, he became desperate for money. With no employment prospects, he devised a devastating simple plan. Missing persons in some of the poorer communities in the area were often never fully investigated or solved. Many were simply overlooked, a fact that Mohan was aware of and determined to exploit. His plan required that he target his victims very carefully. Mohan would loiter in public places, particularly bus stations, where he would look for women that he could befriend. Using a fake name, he would introduce himself as a government official in order to strike up a conversation and find out more about the women he was talking to. He would engineer that conversation to seek out the women who were unmarried. Generally, these women would be in their late 20s or early 30s, an age where, for many, they would be desperate to find a husband. He would ensure that these women were from communities which were both socially and financially disempowered. Often these women were from families of daily wage earners where being unmarried at what was considered to be an advanced age was seen as both costly and undesirable. If the woman fitted within his criteria, Mohan would charm them with promises of a job, relationship, and a better life. After a whirlwind romance, he would propose marriage. Declining to take a dowry, a custom which, whilst illegal, was still very common in low-income areas. He would then suggest to his bride-to-be that they should not wait any longer to be together and that they should elope. Once the woman had agreed his proposal and suggestion of elopement, an offer of marriage from a charming professional government official being difficult to turn down, Mohan would tell them that he had planned their wedding in a different city. He would encourage the unsuspecting woman to bring their finest clothes and jewellery. This was often their only possessions of any value, and he encouraged them to bring them along for their wedding celebration. They would board a bus and make their way to another city. Upon arrival, Mohan would book a hotel room for the night near to the bus station, using fake names in the hotel register. That night, Mohan would have sex with the woman, although it is unclear from news reports whether this was consensual. The following morning, he would tell them to leave their jewellery in the hotel room for safekeeping so that they could head to the temple. As the couple made their way past the bus station, Mohan would tell the woman that she needed to take a contraceptive pill so that she would not become pregnant. Handing her the tablet, Mohan would advise that she would feel the need to urinate straight after it was consumed. As such, the woman would go into the ladies' toilet at the bus station to take the pill. Unknown to the woman, the item that Mohan had given her was not actually a contraceptive, but a cyanide pill. Almost immediately, the unsuspecting woman would collapse and die. Mohan would then return to the hotel, take the jewellery, and take the next bus out of town. This was often before his victim had even been found. When the woman was found, the police would often struggle to identify her. Pictures of the victims tended to be circulated locally where no one would have known her. These deaths would often be recorded as drugs-related or suicides of unidentified women. Mohan was killing vulnerable women, and it would appear that no one even realised that they were dealing with a serial killer. After each murder, he would pawn the jewellery of his victims and use the money to take care of his two separate families. With each kill, he became bolder and more arrogant. In some cases, it is understood that he telephoned the woman's family a few days after their murder and informed them that they had eloped and were very happy, so the family should not worry about their daughter. It appeared that his plan was almost foolproof until a woman by the name of Anitha went missing on 16th of June 2009. Anitha was just 22, younger than many of Mohan's other victims. Anitha's family and friends searched for her for days without any success. They were convinced that their daughter had not run away from home, and the family and local community pressured the police into action. The police began by looking at Anitha's phone records, and it was here that Mohan's perfectly laid plan began to unravel. One of the numbers on Anitha's phone belonged to another lady, Carvery, who had been missing since March 2009. In turn, when Carvery's phone records were examined, two more numbers were linked to missing women. The police soon realised that someone was making calls from one missing woman's SIM card to the next. Unknown to the investigating police at the time, Anitha's unidentified body had been found the day after her disappearance at a bus station around 100 miles from where she lived. After further investigation, the police eventually found a common link: Mohan Kumar. On the 21st of October 2009, 46-year-old Mohan was brought in for questioning. He admitted killing Anitha and at least 19 other women. Some reports state that he confessed to killing as many as 32 young women. These murders dated back to 2004. He provided the police with the details of how he had committed these murders, although he was unable to recollect the names of many of his victims. Those who knew Mohan were in shock. They had no idea that he was anything other than a well-liked, upstanding citizen. The case was brought to the Mangalore Fast Track Court in November 2011 before moving to the 4th Additional and District Sessions Court. The investigating teams gathered enough evidence and witnesses to put Mohan on trial for 20 murders. By this point, Mohan claimed he was innocent. He defended himself, presenting thorough arguments and scouring law books to find loopholes which he could attempt to exploit. Despite these attempts, He was convicted of several of the murders and received the death penalty for his crimes. He remains in prison to this day, determined to appeal his sentence. Normally, in a case like this, I would like to provide the names of all the victims, as they are the most important part of the story. I apologise for not doing so in this case, but reports vary greatly, so I've decided not to include the names rather than potentially include them incorrectly. Thinking of all the victims at this time. That concludes today's story. It's the first time I've covered a story from India. Let me know what you thought of it in the comment section. Thanks very much for listening to the Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The ancient Indian sport of kabaddi is believed to have been played as far back as 4,000 years ago. Goodbye. Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the horrific case of the Camden Ripper, arguably one of Britain's most violent serial killers. Unlike many of the people whose stories we narrate on the Crime Reel, Anthony John Hardy appeared to have had a very normal childhood. He was born on the 31st of May 1951 in Winshill and grew up in Burton-on-Trent, Staffordshire, with his 3 older siblings. His father was a coal miner and, determined to escape a relatively poor lifestyle, Anthony was hard-working and extremely driven in his studies. He earned a place at Imperial College, London, where he obtained an engineer's degree and met his future wife, a lady by the name of Judith Dwight. They married in 1972, then emigrated to Australia, and they had 4 children together, 3 sons and 1 daughter. However, their marriage broke down, and in 1982, Anthony attacked Judith, bludgeoning her with a frozen water bottle before attempting to drown her in the bath. He was arrested, but no charges were filed against him at that time. After this attack, he checked himself into a psychiatric clinic in Queensland, where he remained for several weeks. The couple returned to England. It is unclear whether they were separated at this stage, but 4 years later, Judith divorced him, retaining custody of their 4 children. Anthony began stalking his now ex-wife, which led to her filing a restraining order against him. His life continued to decline. He started to rely heavily on alcohol, became diabetic, and was treated in various psychiatric hospitals across London for alcohol abuse, drug-induced psychosis, depression, and bipolar disorder. He was homeless and either staying in various hostels across the capital city or sleeping rough. During this time, he received various convictions and 3 prison sentences for crimes such as theft and drunken disorderly conduct. He also spent time in psychiatric facilities after being sectioned under the Mental Health Act in 1995. On at least 4 separate occasions, he was investigated for sexual assault, but all charges were dropped due to there being insufficient evidence to bring a case against him. In 2000, Anthony moved into a 1-bedroom public housing flat on Royal College Street, Camden, northwest London. He was viewed as a strange man by his neighbours, and he made no effort to talk to any of them. In January 2002, one of Anthony's neighbours called the police. They had recently had an argument with Anthony over a leaking pipe, and then following this, their front door had been vandalised with offensive graffiti and acid had been poured through the letterbox. A trail of footprints led directly back to Anthony's front door. The police went to Anthony's flat, where he initially denied damaging the neighbour's door, but then changed his mind and admitted that it was in fact him. Whilst in the flat, the police noticed a locked door, and Anthony explained that he had sublet the room to a lady who was away at that time, and he did not have a key to this room. As the police proceeded to take Anthony away on the criminal damage charges, he asked if he could wear his jacket. They agreed, but stated that they needed to check it first. Inside the pockets, they found a key. Checking to see if this opened the locked door, they were shocked by what they found. Posed on the bed was the body of 38-year-old Sally White. Sally, a sex worker from London, was naked other than a towel that was covering her face and head. She had cuts and bruises on her head, and there was blood on the wall above her. A hoodie was found next to the bed with bloodstains that matched the wound on her head, indicating that she had been wearing it at the time of the injury. She also had a bite mark on her thigh. Anthony was arrested for murder. However, despite the circumstances in which Sally was found, as in naked and staged in a locked room, the forensic pathologist, Freddie Patel, concluded that she had died from coronary heart disease. The police were shocked and, in an unusual move, requested a second post-mortem. Again, the same pathologist, Freddie Patel, stated that Sally had died of natural causes and that there were no marks of violence. As a result, at the inquest, the coroner stated that Sally had died of natural causes and that there had been no evidence of foul play or third-party intervention. It should be noted that the forensic pathologist Freddie Patel later came under scrutiny for many controversial findings during his career, and by 2012 was erased from the medical register by the General Medical Council, meaning that he could no longer practice medicine in the United Kingdom. As Sally's death was deemed to be due to natural causes, the police were forced to drop the murder charges, with Anthony only being charged with criminal damage to the neighbour's door. He pled guilty and was transferred to St Luke's Mental Health Hospital in Muswell Hill under Section 37 of the Mental Health Act. During his treatment here, he remained cooperative and engaged, and was often let out of the facility on day release. However, his consultant believed that he remained a danger to women, and in particular sex workers. As someone who had been detained under the Mental Health Act, Anthony had the right to appeal for his release, which he did in May 2002, but it was decided that he had not made sufficient progress and should continue to be held at the hospital. In November 2002, the opinion of the Forensic Mental Health Services was that he had a serious mental disorder and that there was strong evidence of risk of reoffending, and he was likely to cause others serious physical or psychological harm. However, this report remained unopened at the time of his appeal hearing, and it was determined that whilst he was mentally ill, he also had a natural human right to be treated in surroundings which will support and encourage his own efforts. As such, he was released from the facility on the 4th of November 2002. The Mental Health Trust did not advise the police that he had been released. Over the following 8 weeks, his mental health spiralled. Whilst he maintained his weekly psychiatric outpatient appointments at St Luke's, he also went to University College Hospital to get a prescription for Uprima, which is a tablet similar to Viagra. He spoke to sex workers in the King's Cross area, stating that he was a wealthy man looking for dominant sex. He started sneakily taking pictures of women in local bars, advertised for a female lodger, and began watching increasingly violent pornography. Soon after his release, he travelled to the Midlands for a massage, whereupon he violently sexually assaulted the lady, known only as Sarah. On the 30th of December 2002, the police received a call at around 9:45 a.m. A homeless man who had been scavenging for food in rubbish bins, which were behind a pub on Royal College Street, had found 2 human legs. All the rubbish collections in the area were immediately stopped until the bins could be checked. More body parts were found. A human torso, 2 arms and a foot were also discovered. It was quickly established that all of these body parts were female, but they belonged to at least 2 different women. The rubbish that had already been removed and taken to landfill was tracked down and searched. Local drains and the canal were checked, but after 36 hours, no further body parts had been found. Extensive house-to-house inquiries were underway, and one name kept getting mentioned to the police: Anthony Hardy. They visited Anthony's flat in the hope of talking to him, but when they arrived, the door was ajar and Anthony was nowhere to be found. The flat was extremely messy and there was a strong odour inside. The police found a package wrapped in black plastic and twine with a hacksaw and knives on the top. The package contained a second torso. A massive search for Anthony was underway. Hours of CCTV footage from the estate and nearby supermarkets was analysed. Additionally, hospitals in the area were alerted, as it was known that Anthony would need to collect his various medications. The police remained confident that he was still in London. Despite the heads and hands from the bodies still being missing, identification was made. 34-year-old Bridget McLennan was identified from her DNA, and 29-year-old Elizabeth Valad was identified from the unique serial number in her breast implants. Shortly before Christmas, Elizabeth was seen for the last time near King's Cross Station. She was with her boyfriend and left to buy a drink from a nearby shop. She never returned. Bridget was last seen on Christmas Eve when she visited Anthony's flat. Analysis of one of Anthony's supermarket loyalty cards led the police to CCTV footage of Anthony buying heavy-duty black sacks from a nearby Sainsbury's supermarket. CCTV was also found of Anthony casually disposing of a black sack, now known to contain body parts, in a rubbish bin. On the 2nd of January 2003, a now beardless Anthony was spotted by a retired policeman in a secluded smoking room at Great Ormond Street Hospital. The policeman alerted hospital security and the grounds were searched. Anthony was caught and arrested and taken to the police station. A forensic search of Anthony's flat followed, using luminol to highlight where blood had been present. The results were extensive, particularly in the bath, drag marks between the rooms, and in the area where it is presumed he dismembered the bodies. Neighbours would later state that they had heard drilling over the Christmas period and had seen Anthony disposing of bin bags. They had assumed he was doing some DIY and only realised the significance of what they had seen as news of the case circulated. During the police interviews, Anthony replied, "No comment," to every question that was asked of him. He never provided any explanation to any of the evidence shown to him. Some of that evidence included around 44 photographs that Anthony had taken that showed the two murdered women posed in pornographic positions whilst wearing a red devil mask and the same baseball cap that Anthony himself had been wearing at the time of the arrest. He was charged with Bridget and Elizabeth's murders as well as Sally's murder, which had originally been recorded as a death from natural causes. The case went to trial in November 2003, at which point Anthony changed his plea to guilty to all 3 counts of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. He was later placed on the list of whole-life tariff prisoners, with a High Court judge stating that Anthony's was one of the exceptionally rare cases in which life should mean life. Despite extensive police efforts, Bridget and Elizabeth's heads and hands were never found. On the 26th of November 2020, Anthony died of sepsis at the age of 69. He has been linked to several other similar cases over the years, including Zoe Parker, a sex worker who was found dismembered in the River Thames in 2001, Sharon Hoare, who was killed in Fulham in 1991, Christine McGovern, who was murdered in Walthamstow in 1995, and 2 other murders that occurred in Nottinghamshire, which was a short distance from where Anthony grew up. However, his involvement in these cases has never been proven. That concludes today's story about Anthony Hardy, also known as the Camden Ripper. Please add any comments down below, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. When Anthony was arrested, he definitely resisted arrest. He knocked out one of the arresting officers and he stabbed another whose eye was dislocated from its socket. There were brave police officers at work there. Oh, and despite this story, Camden is a great place to visit. I go there often. Goodbye. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the life and extensive crimes of Tommy Lynn Sells. Tommy was born in Oakland, California on the 28th of June 1964. He was born along with his twin sister Tammy to Nina Sells, a single mother who already had 3 other children by the time the twins were born. When the twins were just 18 months old, Tommy and Tammy contracted meningitis. Tommy survived, but unfortunately, Tammy passed away as a result of this illness. His sister's tragic death did, however, lead to the only time in Tommy's life that he would describe as happy. He went on to live with his mother's aunt, Bonnie, who would look after him for the next few years. Bonnie described him as a happy, playful child, and his favourite activity was riding his tricycle up and down the street. During this period of Tommy's life, his mother, Nina, never visited him, and as a result of great aunt Bonnie began to look into officially adopting Tommy. This action got Nina's attention. She took Tommy back from Bonnie when he was 5 years old, and Bonnie was never allowed to visit him again. This was the beginning of dark times for young Tommy. Nina was negligent, and Tommy was mainly left to fend for himself. From a very young age, he began to skip classes and act out in school, and eventually began to start using alcohol and drugs. At the age of 8, Tommy was introduced to a man by the name of Willis Clark, who would set Tommy off on a path that would ultimately lead to so much pain and devastation. Willis was a man from a neighbouring town who took a keen interest in Tommy. He sent Tommy gifts, took him out for trips, and even spent nights with Tommy both at his own home and at Nina's house with the other children. Willis was later convicted for sexually assaulting children, with Tommy being one of his victims. Tommy claimed that his mother knew of the assaults and never did anything to try to stop them. He would later state that reliving his own experiences and trauma played a significant part in his crimes over the years. Tommy dropped out of school, spending his time drinking and getting high. When Tommy was 13 years old, his fractured family shattered completely when he climbed into his grandmother's bed naked and later then tried to sexually assault his mother. Just days after these 2 incidents, the family packed up and abandoned Tommy without telling him that they were leaving or where they were going. 13-year-old Tommy was left completely on his own. Tommy said that he couldn't deal with this abandonment and attacked the first woman he saw, pistol whipping her until she lost consciousness and then running away from town. He travelled across the states by hitchhiking and train hopping, making money doing odd jobs and begging on the streets. In 1981, with Tommy now 17 years old, he was reunited with his family. However, it was to be an extremely short-lived reunion after Tommy attempted to sexually assault his mother, Nina, for a second time. She once again kicked him out of the house. Tommy was back on the streets again, and he returned to his nomadic lifestyle of train hopping and odd jobs. At the age of 18, he became a father after a woman named Cindy Hannah gave birth to their son. Cindy's family strongly disapproved of Tommy and made things difficult for him to stay with Cindy and their child. As a result, in July 1983, Tommy left town once again, but not before a man matching his description was seen leaving the home of Thomas and Colleen Gill, who were found along with their 4-year-old daughter beaten to death. In May 1984, Tommy was convicted of stealing a car and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Whilst he was in prison, he became a father for a second time after Nicole Snow gave birth to their daughter. He was paroled in February of 1985, but over the following years spent time in and out of prison on various parole violations, public intoxication and theft charges, whilst continuing to drift between US states. In May 1992, now living in Charleston, West Virginia, Tommy was begging on the streets when a 19-year-old woman named Fabienne Witherspoon offered to feed him a hot meal at her home. She asked him to wait outside while she went in and prepared something for him. But when she came back from the kitchen, he was standing inside her house. He grabbed a knife and attempted to sexually abuse her, but Fabienne fought back, managed to get the knife off of Tommy and stabbed him, catching him in the liver and the kidney. Tommy hit her over the head with a piano stool and Fabienne lost consciousness. Tommy fled the scene but ended up in the hospital due to his injuries, where he was arrested once again. Tommy was subsequently convicted and sentenced to between 2 and 10 years for malicious wounding. The sexual assault charge was dropped. It was during this time that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and also married for the first time. When he was released from prison, his wife, Nora Price, was waiting and the couple moved to Tennessee in May 1997. However, it didn't take Tommy long to leave his wife and return to his nomadic lifestyle, working as a Ferris wheel operator for a travelling carnival. Meanwhile, his wife Nora Price gave birth to Tommy's third child, a son whom she gave up for adoption. In October 1998, Tommy married Jessica Levery, although this marriage was not legal due to him never having divorced Nora. He continued to be arrested for relatively minor crimes, such as public intoxication and threatening behaviour. In 1999, Tommy became friendly with the Harris family while living in Del Rio, Texas. They attended the same church, and Tommy would often visit Terry Harris to ask for marital advice and to spend time with Terry's wife, Crystal, and also their son and 2 daughters. It was during this time that another family and friends of the Harrises, called the Searles, were also planning a move to Del Rio, and Terry Harris offered to help them. On their way to pick up some of their belongings, Terry, Pam Searle and her boyfriend, Doug Luca, stopped by a bar at the edge of town to fill up on petrol, and here they bumped into Tommy. Terry told him that he would be out of town for the night, helping Pam pick up her things, and that Crystal and the 3 children would be staying at home. Tommy remained at the bar until it closed, eventually being kicked out at around 2 a.m. on the 31st of December 1999. It was then that he made his way to the Harris' home, climbing inside through an open window. The window led to Terry and Crystal's 14-year-old son, Justin's room. Justin woke up and noticed that someone was in his room. Justin, who was blind, believed that it was his sisters and yelled at them to get out before going back to sleep. Tommy then left Justin's room, first checking on the master bedroom and finding Crystal asleep with one of her daughters in her bed. He left them there, moving on to the next bedroom, where he found 13-year-old Kayleen Harris asleep on the bottom bunk. He lay down beside her and nudged her awake before clamping his hand down on her mouth and pulling out a 12-inch boning knife. He cut off her clothes and began to assault her, but Kayleen managed to break free and shout for help. It was only then that Tommy realised that 10-year-old Crystal Searles, Pam's daughter, was sleeping on the top bunk. Tommy jumped up and turned on the light so he could see them both. He sliced Kayleen's throat twice before stabbing her 16 times. Crystal Searles begged for her life, but Tommy slit her throat too and fled the scene, wiping his fingerprints from the door handle and taking 2 window screens that he believed had his fingerprints on them. Miraculously, Crystal Searles survived. She believed that everyone in the house must already be dead and managed to walk to a neighbouring house with a severed trachea. She was unable to speak to tell the neighbours what had happened and instead wrote the sentences, "The Harrises are hurt. Tell them to hurry. Will I live?" The police were called and Crystal was rushed to the hospital, where she was able to give a detailed description of her attacker. Tommy was arrested 2 days later. He confessed to the murder and voluntarily accompanied the police to the Harris' house, leading them through a reenactment of his crime. He described in detail how he had murdered Kayleen and attempted to murder Crystal. Tommy pled guilty to the attempted murder charge at trial, but did not admit to killing or sexually assaulting Kayleen. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty of murder. With Tommy now behind bars, he began to confess to many other murders that he had committed during the 1970s, 80s and 90s all over the United States. He claimed that he committed his first murder when he was just 15 years old, stating that he was waiting to rob a house when he saw a man molesting a child. Tommy claimed to have killed the man for this reason, although later evidence indicated that no abuse had taken place. The following year, 1980, he said that he had killed a man with an ice pick in Los Angeles. At the age of 21, he claims to have killed 35-year-old Ira Cord and her 4-year-old son in Forsyth, Missouri, after he had spent the night with Ira and woke up to find her stealing from his backpack. He said that in 1986 he was working for a towing company and received a call from a sex worker whose car had broken down. He then claimed to have killed her when she declined his suggestion of sex in lieu of payment. On the 1st of May 1987, he claimed to have murdered 27-year-old Suzanne Korch outside of a bar in Niagara Falls. It would take 8 years for her remains to be discovered, less than 2 miles from where she was last seen. 5 months later, he said that he had murdered Stephanie Strow near Winnemucca, Nevada. Then, less than a month after this, in November 1987, Tommy was hitchhiking in Illinois when a man by the name of Keith Dardeen found Tommy begging on the streets and offered him a hot meal back at his family home. Tommy accepted, but when he arrived at the house, he shot Keith Dardeen and mutilated his penis. He then bludgeoned Keith's 3-year-old son to death with a hammer and turned on Keith's pregnant wife, Elaine. Tommy attempted to sexually abuse her, but the trauma and shock of witnessing the murders of her son and her husband made her start to go into labour. Elaine gave birth to a daughter in the midst of the carnage, and neither the mother or the baby would survive. Tommy beat them both to death, arranged the bodies of Elaine and her children neatly in her bed, and then left town. The murders of the Dardeen family went unsolved for 12 years until Tommy's confession. The following September, Melissa Ann Tremblay went missing and her body was later discovered by a railroad track. Melissa had been seen in the car park of a store with a man matching Tommy's appearance shortly before she disappeared. At around the same time, Tommy said that he befriended a mother with a 3-year-old son and used them to help him beg for money. The 3 of them went on a road trip in a black van that Tommy had stolen, and neither the mother or child was ever seen again. In December 1988, he claimed to have murdered 51-year-old Kent Allen Lawton by cutting his throat following an argument over marijuana. The following January, he stated that he killed a sex worker in Truckee, Nevada, after discovering that the person he believed to be a woman was actually a man. In May 1989, he had moved on to Oregon, where it is believed that he killed 2 people in Roseburg. After serving his sentence for the attack on Fabienne Witherspoon, he soon returned to his life of crime. On the 15th of October 1997, he abducted and killed 13-year-old Stephanie Mahaney of Springfield, Missouri. He said that his van broke down and he spotted Stephanie playing outside. Her body was later found in a farm pond. He was indicted but never tried for this murder. Tommy also claims responsibility for the murders of Deborah Harris and her 8-year-old daughter, Amria Halliburton, in Gibson County, Tennessee in April 1999. Just 2 weeks later, he strangled 9-year-old Mary Beatrice Perez after abducting her from a fair, with her body later being found near a drainage ditch. He was later convicted of this crime. In May 1999, he sexually assaulted and murdered 13-year-old Haley McCone, stealing her bicycle and then selling it for $20. 2 months later, he abducted 14-year-old Bobby Lynn Woodford from a shop near Kingfisher in Oklahoma. He sexually assaulted the young girl and then shot her as she was trying to escape. Her body wasn't found until 4 months later, and Tommy was linked to this crime through a pair of earrings that he removed from Bobby's body. On the 30th of December 1999, the day before Kayleen's murder and the attempted murder of Crystal, Tommy said that he was responsible for the murders of Danny and Kathy Freeman, who were found dead in their burning mobile home in Welch, Oklahoma. Their daughter Ashley and her friend Loria Bible have never been seen since. Tommy claims that he killed the two girls and dumped their bodies near Red River on the border between Oklahoma and Texas. Some of the murders that Tommy admitted to have been difficult to verify, or at times his confession was inconsistent with the evidence that the police have. This was perhaps due to his excessive drug use and alcohol dependence at the time. However, investigators believe that they have confirmed the details of at least 22 murders that Tommy committed. Tommy himself claimed that he did not know how many people he had killed, but speculation hints that it could be as high as 70. He lacked any remorse or guilt for his crimes, stating that he liked to watch his victims' eyes fade and that he didn't want children to live through the pain that he himself had lived through. He was executed by lethal injection in Texas on the 3rd of April 2014. That concludes today's case about Tommy Lynn Sells. Please add any comments down below. Thank you for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. There is a book written by Diane Fanning called Through the Window. It's all about the Tommy Lynn Sells story. Goodbye. For this week's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the lives of Robert and Stephen Spahalski from New York. On the 12th of December 1954, identical twins Robert and Stephen were born. They were the only children born to Bernard and Anita Spahalski and grew up in Elmira, New York. Details about their childhood are scarce, but it is known that their parents divorced when the boys were around 12 years old, after which they were raised only by their mother. The family lived in a 3-bedroom house at Bower Road in West Elmira and attended school at the nearby Elmira Free Academy. Both boys were strong and athletic, and they were also very good at gymnastics. Robert was on both the gymnastic and track teams. The pair were very close growing up, were sociable with their peers, and they liked to party. By the time they were in their mid-teens, their descent into a life of crime had already begun. In July 1971, at the age of 16, Robert was arrested and charged with driving a stolen car after being stopped by the police in Elmira. Just a few weeks later, he was charged with felony arson after he set fire to the stage curtain at his high school. By October of that year, he had been sentenced to 15 weekends in jail after he pled guilty to the car charges from July. The following month, on 24th of November 1971, Mrs. Ida Ziegler found her 48-year-old son-in-law, Ronald Ripley, in the basement of his store. The store was called the Salad Master Kitchen and it was in Elmira Heights. Ronald had been stabbed to death. The police investigation established that witnesses had seen Ronald in the store at 320 East 14th Street at around 11:30 p.m. the previous evening. A witness came forward to state that they had seen Ronald driving at around 11:45 p.m. and when Ronald's car was found abandoned behind Jim's Grocery and the car wash near Fitch's Bridge in West Elmira. The police search began to focus on whether Ronald had offered a hitchhiker a lift. It was then established that Ronald's assailant had crept up behind him in the store before striking him on the head with a hammer. He was then stabbed to death. Already known to the police, Stephen was questioned as part of the inquiry, but was not considered a suspect in the case. The following month, Robert was again in trouble with the law, this time for criminal trespass, and by 1972, Robert had been incarcerated in Chemung County Jail due to a parole violation. Meanwhile, the investigation into Ronald's murder continued, and as more evidence was discovered, the police once again brought Stephen in for questioning. At this point, Stephen admitted killing Ronald, claiming that it was because Ronald had made unwanted sexual advances towards him. On the 4th of May 1972, Stephen was arraigned on the charge of murder and sent to Chemung County Jail, where his brother was also being held. Stephen was represented by public defender Samuel Castellino. He pled guilty to manslaughter, thus avoiding a trial. Robert was released, but was soon in trouble with the law again. In July 1973, he was found guilty of stealing $3,000 worth of cash and equipment from a music store in Elmira. He received a 5-year prison sentence, but served only 2 years. The crimes continued, and in July 1976, Robert was charged with third-degree burglary after breaking into a high school in Elmira. Again, he received a prison sentence, this time for 2 to 5 years. He was sent to the Auburn Correctional Facility, where his brother Stephen was serving his sentence. At the time, the two men looked identical. In July of 1978, when prison inmates were servicing an old army truck, either Stephen or Robert tried to escape in a hidden compartment under the truck. The escape attempt was foiled after prison officials were tipped off, and it was reported that, because the corrections officials were unable to tell which brother had attempted to escape, they threw them both into solitary confinement. At the time, neither brother would confirm who was involved, but it was later reported that Stephen claimed that it was Robert. The following year, in November 1979, Robert was released from prison and started a job as a mechanic's helper. However, this period of going straight did not last long. Less than 2 years later, in July 1981, he was charged, together with an accomplice by the name of Roger Saxbury, with stealing a coin collection rumoured to be worth around $15,000. This would be worth approximately $57,000 now. The following month he pled guilty to this crime and was again sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison. Upon his release in December 1984, he moved to Rochester, New York. Rochester has one of the highest crime rates and fastest declining populations in the US. Throughout his life, Robert had become increasingly dependent upon illegal drugs, and by the 1990s, he had become a sex worker in order to fund his addiction to crack cocaine. On the 2nd of October 1991, Robert was stopped by the police whilst driving a 1980 Plymouth Volare. When questioned, Robert told the police that he was the owner of the car and that his name was Charles Grande, a local landscape company owner. He was sent on his way. 2 days later, on the 4th of October 1991, 40-year-old Charles Grande's body was found in the bedroom at his home. He had been beaten to death with a hammer. The police suspected that Robert was responsible for the murder, but did not have enough evidence to charge him. He was, however, charged with criminal impersonation, a charge from which he was acquitted in August 1992. Over the years, he continued to have run-ins with the law, and further arrests, charges and prison sentence followed for burglary, robbery and drug-related offences. His twin, Stephen, was released from prison in 1999. Within a few months he was back behind bars after violating the terms of his parole. Several years later, in November 2005, Robert walked into the police headquarters in Rochester, New York. He walked to the front desk and told the officer that a few days earlier he had murdered his neighbour, 54-year-old Vivian Irizarry. Vivian had been one of Robert's closest friends and lived in the apartment next to him at Spencer Street in Rochester. Robert told the police that he and Vivian had been sharing a $100 bag of crack cocaine when he had begun to hallucinate. He saw Vivian as a demon and freaked out, stabbing her multiple times. When Robert came down from his high, he saw Vivian convulsing and suffering. However, instead of calling for help, he decided that her wounds were fatal and choked her to death to end her suffering. He then bathed her and moved her body to the basement where it was cooler. It is believed that Robert felt guilty about the killing, leading to his confession, and he told the police how he would visit the body to cry and apologise to his friend. However, that was not the end of Robert's confession. He then went on to state how this was not his first murder. On the 31st of December 1990, he had sex with 24-year-old Moraine Armstrong, a woman who lived in the house opposite him on Lake Avenue in Rochester. When Moraine demanded money from him in return, Robert went into a rage as he did not feel that he had to pay, as he had shared his cocaine with her. In an explosion of temper, he choked her to death with an electrical cord. He made no attempt to hide Moraine's body, and when the police discovered the murder, he loitered around the scene talking to them about how he knew the victim. And then another confession followed. 7 months after Moraine's murder, Robert killed again. On the 21st of July 1991, Robert's girlfriend, Adrienne Berger, was found dead in her home at Emerson Street. The heating in her apartment was on, and together with the heat wave at the time, her body was badly decomposed by the time it was discovered. As such, a cause of death could not be established, and her death was never investigated. Robert still wasn't finished. He went on to tell the police how, a year after he had killed Adrienne, he struck again. Robert confessed to the 1991 killing of 40-year-old Charles Grande, a crime that he had been the prime suspect in after being found in the victim's car. Despite being the prime suspect in the murder, the police had never been able to get enough evidence to charge him. Robert stated that Charles had become a regular client of his, trading sex in return for drug money. He said that Charles had attempted to shortchange him, and as a result, Robert beat Charles to death with a hammer. Around the time of these killings, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, there were many other unsolved murders in the area near Lake Avenue and Lyle Avenue in Rochester. This is the same area where serial killer Arthur Shawcross, known as the Genesee River Killer, picked up at least 11 of his victims. In addition, another suspected serial killer, John White, who was believed to be responsible for up to 5 murders, was operating in the same area at that time. John died of a heart attack before he could face trial. Serial killers are thankfully very rare, so having 3 independent killers in the same area at the same time is unheard of, and obviously had a huge impact on the many ongoing investigations. Robert's confessions matched the physical evidence and witness testimonies in all of these crimes. With many similar unsolved murders, he soon became a person of interest in many more cases, all of which he claims to have not been involved in. It has been reported that Robert is strongly suspected of being involved in the following murders. 21-year-old Demeter Gibson disappeared while walking home in 1991. Her body was found alongside railway tracks behind J Street 5 days later. She had been strangled and stabbed. Her mother later stated that she had seen Robert with her daughter. 26-year-old Cassandra Carlton and 25-year-old Katrina Myers were also found strangled and naked near railway tracks near Lyle Avenue. 30-year-old Victoria Jobson disappeared from her apartment in Lake Avenue in October 1992. Robert lived in the same building. Her body was found off of Lyle Avenue. She was naked and had been stabbed to death. 45-year-old Hortense Greatheart was strangled in her apartment in Lake Avenue in a building where Robert also lived. The heat in her apartment had also been turned to maximum, similar to that in the murder of Adrienne Berger. 1 year after making his confessions, Robert asked the judge to rule that these could not be used at trial. Robert's argument was that in 1991 his lawyer had told the police that he could not be questioned in relation to any murders without legal representation. In 2005, when he walked into the police station, he provided these confessions without any lawyer present, which he claimed made them inadmissible in court. In September 2006, the judge ruled that the confessions were admissible as there was no evidence that the police in 2005 would have any knowledge of the past letter. Initially, the defence strategy was that Robert was not guilty by reason of insanity, but when the trial actually began in November 2006, they pursued a different defence. His attorney, Joseph D'Amelio, stated that Robert had been a drug addict his entire adult life and was suffering from extreme emotional disturbance. Joseph argued that as Robert was high on crack cocaine during the killings, he could not form intent to kill. He went on to state that Robert had been questioned for 12 straight hours by the police without access to the medication which he took 4 times a day. This medicine was for his mental health problems. The prosecutor, however, stated that the brutality of the murders and Robert's detailed description of them during the confession showed beyond a doubt that he knew what he was doing. The jury deliberated for less than 2.5 hours before finding Robert guilty on all counts. The prosecutor argued that due to the violent nature of his crimes, he should never be released from prison. In December 2006, he was sentenced to 100 years in state prison. When given the opportunity to speak, he said, "I would like to say to the families, I apologise. I'm very sorry." He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. There are some reports which state that the brothers were in a deadly competition with each other. However, I've been unable to find anything to support this. On the contrary, it has been reported that when Stephen heard about his brother's crime while still in prison himself, he stated that he thought he was the only killer in the family. That concludes our video for today. I would be really grateful if you could subscribe and like the video. As always, please add any comments down below. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. The Oxygen channel featured these twins in their Killer Siblings series. Goodbye.